And I wonder then if that's where the aliens could be fitting in ideologically within the story, because they are the natural world come to avenge itself or remind a very sort of Kavalier humanity that it can't escape its biological substrate into artificiality, right? The natural world will always intrude. I'm Professor Stephen Dyson.
And I'm Professor Jeff Dudas.
And we are two professors of political science who have just watched the first episodes of Alien Earth, and we are here to break down its themes and its underlying ideas. But first, I just want to get a quick temperature check, Jeff. What did you make of Alien Earth?
I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah?
I'm not the biggest Alien franchise aficionado, but I thought it was pretty interesting. I thought it was pretty well done. I think it's well acted. We've got some big name actors who are affiliated with it. Noah Hawley has some experience doing prestige-like TV. And I thought that all that stuff showed, I thought, in the first two episodes.
Yeah, so I am a big fan of the franchise, and in particular, like everyone is, the first two movies, which I think are sort of seminal science fiction movies. And I was sort of fearful for this series, and I think very few of the things I was fearful of have actually happened. So that's a negative way of expressing a positive, I think. And I'm interested, very interested by its sort of central problematic, its central themes, and certainly interested enough to kind of keep watching and stay invested in it.
Yeah, and the other thing that I should say is that my last experience with the Alien franchise was Alien
Romulus.
Romulus was released, and that struck me as a pretty paint by numbers, bog standard sci-fi horror. And so that was my last experience with this franchise, which maybe led me to have depressed expectations.
Yeah, so when I say the things I feared did not happen, the things I feared were some of the things that happened in Alien Romulus. And I don't think that's in here, because I think Alien Romulus didn't really have a central problematic or a central set of ideas that are sort of alien related, that are congruent with but push beyond what the franchise has done in the past. Whereas I think that is exactly what's going on in Alien Earth, and that's one of the things that we want to talk about. Maybe the first thing we want to talk about is the underlying idea or question that's being asked by this series, what we might call a problematic, right? Something that sets the frames of reference for the questions a text is going to ask and maybe start suggesting some answers. I think that problematic in Alien, the original movie, was to do with sort of capitalism, to do with social class, to do with the extent to which a social system kind of invades and takes over and sort of enslaves, if you like, human bodies and human labor. And that was kind of represented in the life cycle of the Xenomorph, that kind of breached the biological barrier and kind of repurposed human labor for its own purposes. You also had the corporation as this kind of looming evil presence that gave it a kind of capitalist gloss. And then there were clearly social class things going on aboard the Nostromo, the kind of upper and lower decks, and the extent to which they were all working and eventually giving their lives for a wage. There was clearly a capitalist problematic in the original movie. I think that's not what's going on in the first two episodes of Alien Earth. I think there's a different sort of central theme or central set of ideas that are being gotten at. Jeff, I would say it's transhumanism.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll talk about that, I think, a lot momentarily. But I do think there remains a kind of tech capitalism element here. This strikes me as a text that, at least in its first two episodes, is of its time, right? We've got as we talked about earlier, we've got the world apparently split up into essentially the 5 big company towns, I suppose we could say it. And all of these towns are kind of appear to be run by tech overlords in the same sort of way that we can point to contemporary times in which you've got Apple and Meta and Tesla and Amazon, right? All sort of working around the boundaries not only of economic life, but increasingly of life itself. And I'm thinking of this town in Texas that Elon Musk and Tesla have literally turned it into a company town. Or think about the way that the Disney Corporation has been able to literally gain control of a plot of land in Florida and turn it into a literal company town. It harkens on one hand back to the sort of the Henry Ford era of company towns, but it strikes me as pointing us directly or implanting us directly in the contemporary moment as well. So I agree that mostly, at least from these first 2 episodes, it does seem like this is a story that's mostly about the boundary crossing that occurs with the biological and the synthetic of one form or another, and that kind of question of the human. But I do wonder if we're going to get more of the kind of the corporate world and the corporate takeover of contemporary life as the series goes on.
Yeah, so that's a very sharp point. I think what might be going on is that each corporation kind of has, if you focus on any of the 5 corporations, you'd probably get a different version of the alien problematic, right? So Wayland Yutani has always been about profit and, secondarily, although of course these things are linked, kind of using the aliens, particularly the Xenomorph, which is the only one we've seen in the franchise so far, as sort of weapons for weapons research and kind of turning a profit that way. And I think they're still broadly about that, right? Like it's a Wayland Yutani research vessel that crashes in the first episode. Yutani, when she gets on the phone, is wants her property back, right? This is proprietary stuff for my weapons research to turn a profit. The Prodigy Corporation, which is the one that was centrally focused on, seems to be about something different, right? But Boy Kavalier, the head of the founder of the corporation, says, like, I'm not interested in money. He has a very good and funny line where he says, people think it's always about money with trillionaires, but actually he's a transhumanist, and his corporation seems to be interested primarily in that kind of thing.
Right.
And he says humans are in an intelligence race with AI, and he sees his particular form of transhumanism, which is developing the hybrids, the kind of downloading, the severing of human consciousness from a biological substrate that allows it to be kind of downloaded into a synthetic body, leading to the hybrids. He sees those as his great contribution to not really artificial intelligence, but to maintaining a supremacy of humans within an intelligence race with other AI.
Yes, I agree with all of that. But also, don't rich people always say that it's not about the money?
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So it makes me wonder if it will also not come back at some point later in the series.
Yeah, I don't think he's giving away all his money. I don't think he's he's into charity and all the rest of it. I'm just saying that. Well, let me push on this point slightly further. There was a very tight link between the capitalist problematic and the figure of the Xenomorph, the figure of the titular alien in the Alien movie, right? The alien was the corporate monster, right? The unstoppable, rapacious force that takes over human lives and repurposes them and uses them as expendable labor. And that was what was going on. There's a very tight link between the monster and the monstrous theme. The Xenomorph, and really the aliens writ large in Alien Earth, don't seem to me to have a tight link with the central problematic of the show, which is transhumanism. Right, the characters that have that tight link are the synths, the AIs, the 3 varieties of post-humans that are described literally in the opening kind of scroll of the show. Which means for a show that has always been about, or a franchise that has always been about aliens, and in particular the Xenomorphs, the aliens are kind of curiously peripheral to what's going on ideologically in the show.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit off camera, and we both agreed that the alien bits of this first 2 shows are by far the least interesting. And those are the ones in a show that does not feel to me to be a paint by numbers kind of script or presentation. It's in those moments where the aliens take some pride of focus, where the series begins to feel a little worn in and ordinary. And so it does, I think you're right, that the aliens seem to be at most a kind of a prop to get to what the authors of the story are really interested in. And maybe that's always been sort of the case, right? In the ways that you talk about, that the alien is always standing in for something else. But here, I think I agree with you. They feel even less substantial than usual. And I found myself as a viewer kind of patiently biding my time, or impatiently biding my time, waiting for the alien bits to be over so that we could get to the real story.
Yeah, I did have the thoughts, that this was Alien : Blade Runner. right? That was the franchise he wanted to do. And there's the very first screen, the opening crawl of Alien Earth is this explanation of the different types of synthetics, which is also the first screen in both Blade Runner movies. They have it set in a big tower, which also very famously happens in Blade Runner. And there's the kind of incongruous smushing together of different kind of architectural or time periods. Isn't there the bit where the Xenomorph kind of rampages through? What are they supposed to be like? The party they're having? That's what are they, like French Renaissance people, or with the powdered wigs?
It's a costume party where they've put themselves together as kind of Victorian.
It's like Jeff Sebastian's apartments writ large. So there was an element of that going on, which is fine. Blade Runner and Alien were always they were close together in cinematic time, and they were universes that people have argued are actually the same universe, but they were definitely ideologically linked. So that's okay.
Yeah. The other thing that happens is you say that I realize that there's a lot of playing with time and in playing with past, present, and future as a mode of storytelling, but actually as a mode of living, particularly in these scenes that we see at the city, right? What certainly seems to be a company town.
Yeah, Prodigy City.
Prodigy City.
Isn't that what it's called? No, New Siam.
New Siam.
Maybe Prodigy City is its subtitle.
But what we see, there's this constant kind of morphing back and forth between memories of the past or images of the past, nostalgic moments. Remember, this is taking place in the 2100s, and one of our main characters, the brother, played by Alex Loeffler, is obsessed with 1970s baseball.
Yeah,
American baseball.
Joe DiMaggio Hermit is his name.
Yeah, right. And so he's learned this from his father in the flashback scenes with the family, the apartments that they're in, the technology that they're engaged in watching or entertaining themselves with. It's all very old, it's like TV sets. Yeah. The movie, right, Ice Age is the one that he and his sister are obsessed with. That movie is from the early 2000s. So these are all relics in a certain way of a particular kind of human storytelling past, in the same way that Victorian party or whatever it is, Bacchanal or whatever's going on in the apartment is also a relic of human entertaining past. To say nothing, as we'll talk about a lot, I think momentarily, to say nothing of the whole Peter Pan motif.
Yeah, we're going to come to that very shortly. I mean, I wonder if one thing that's going on then, and we're just going to have to watch more of this show to figure out if this is true. I wonder if one thing that's going on is a sort of broader story about the inability ultimately to escape the biological nature of being a human being, right? Like, it's a society that builds new humans, but still looks to the past for its emotional resonances.
Yeah.
And I wonder then if that's where the aliens could be fitting in ideologically within the story, because they are the natural world come to avenge itself or remind a very sort of Kavalier, quote unquote, humanity that it can't escape its biological substrate into artificiality, right? The natural world will always intrude. There will always be, pandemics or the intrusion of, again, the natural world. And these aliens are merely particularly kind of focused and visceral examples of the inability to escape your biological nature. After all, at one point, is it Kirsch who says, remember, you humans who think you're very clever now, you're just animals.
You're food.
Yeah, and you're just food. And that's just an inescapable reality of physically existing within the universe, which again is a reality you can't escape with all your techno stuff.
And I think that's right. And then recall quickly Wendy's response to him, which is this stubborn kind of humanistic optimism. No, he's not going to die. My brother's not going to die. I'm going to go save him.
Right.
And on one hand, maybe that plays as immature because she's really a 12-year-old girl. But on the other hand, it perhaps points to the other thing that makes human beings human in a certain way, which is this kind of unshakable faith in what's possible.
Yeah. So I want to get to Peter Pan and to a kind of broader question of kind of boundaries and boundary crossing, which is always a theme of alien movies. There was one thing I wanted to say, though, that when we were talking about the peripheral nature of the aliens and the Xenomorph, and I wanted to get your view on this. The Xenomorph that was shown, the classic villain from the alien movies, that thing is obsessed with Joe, with the brother.
Yeah.
right? I mean, I wonder if this is just accidental, or he has plot armor, or it's sloppy writing, or they're actually trying to lead us to somewhere more interesting. That thing follows him around the set, never killing him. And at one point, it
kidnaps him at the end.
Kidnaps him at the end without killing him, because he's obviously not dead, because then where is the show gonna go? But at one point, it literally is in the background listening to, actually on several occasions, at least two, it's listening to him have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Only when Joe finishes the conversation does it come and kill the person he was talking to, rather than get kind of Joe himself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That thing loves him.
We'll have to see if there's something more there, if those are intentional bits of storytelling, or if they're just kind of artifacts.
Yeah, we can't kill this character that's clearly got to be central. Yeah. All right, very good. So that was kind of the first big theme we wanted to talk about. What is the underlying problematic of the show? What does it seem to be? Secondly, we wanted to talk about, in particular, the Peter Pan kind of mythology that's underpinning a lot of the show, and maybe situate it within a kind of broader set of questions that Alien is always about, which is the permeability of what might seem to be kind of hard boundaries between dichotomous things, human and alien, biological and artificial. In the original movie, it was certainly kind of reproductive cycles, as they're usually assigned to sex, and then kind of gender identities as society might build onto them. But I know you in particular want to start with Peter Pan.
Yeah, I think that the Peter Pan layering of the story is pretty sharp storytelling, actually, and I think it's effectively done, and it's very evocative, right? Peter Pan is a very conventional and well-known, famous story. What it really is about, of course, is nothing. It's about exactly the constant boundary crossing from the real to the fantastic, from the fictional to the non-fictional, from childhood to adulthood. And it strikes me as an especially sharp bit of storytelling here to make our boy Kavalier, who certainly seems like he's going to be maybe the major antagonist, to make him obsessed with this story. He's built this kind of island compound that he calls Neverland that definitely has certain resonances with the fictional Neverland, as has been told, particularly in the Disney cartoon, which is something that we see is shown on, kind of above the screen planetarium style when our sick children are having their consciousnesses uploaded into synthetic bodies. Boy Kavalier reads Peter Pan, the original J.M. Barrie story, to the children at night as their bedtime story. The children all take on the names of famous characters from Peter Pan, particularly, Marcy becomes Wendy, I think is our protagonist. But then all the other children who come in and who also have their consciousnesses implanted into the synthetic beings, they become literally the Lost Boys, and they all take on the names of actual Lost Boys from Peter Pan, Smee and Toodles and Slightly. Yeah. Right? These are all Lost Boys, famous Lost Boys. And so it's Wendy and the Lost Boys. And what do? Well, they go out on their adventure, and Wendy is the leader. Now, in the J.M. Barrie story, Wendy is very much imagined as a mother figure, and is taken to be the mother of these Lost Boys. Here, she's the leader, but we don't get a lot of maternal themes so far. But in a story, as you say, in a franchise, as you say, that is all about the crossing of allegedly impermeable and strict boundaries and barriers, and the easy traversing of those boundaries, whether they be biological or synthetic, fictional, non-fictional, the real, the fantastic. It strikes me that setting this within the kind of Peter Pan storytelling universe in a certain way is a particularly appropriate way to enrich the entirety of the story, and is also consistent with what we were just talking about. It's about embedding this form of contemporary sci-fi horror storytelling within a very different tradition of human storytelling, one that is generally pitched more at children or is imagined more to be a childlike story. And the same thing happens with the constant references to the movie Ice Age. I think part of what's happening is that the show is trying to tell us that there is this kind of continuum of human storytelling that deals with the exact same issues over and over again. And that one of the ways to make these kinds of issues, these boundary crossing issues, so central to the possibilities of life, of human life, is to constantly cross-reference the forms of storytelling with one another.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. So that's a very sharp kind of set of points. And I agree that the Peter Pan mythos is absolutely crucial. And also that, you know, Peter Pan is, I've never read the book. I just know the kind of general kind of themes of it. But as I understand it, the book is actually quite dark in a way that a lot of sort of fairy tales are. And that, I agree, that's a very interesting way into a sci-fi horror circumstance is to pitch it as a fairy tale. I'm always a little scared is the wrong word, but kind of dubious when you start importing children into this kind of situation, this kind of hard sci-fi situation. And, you know, that's because I take science fiction very seriously as a genre that's doing important critical work and ideological work. And so I'm always very, very conscious that the science fiction needs to be doing two things. One is it definitely needs to be fulfilling an estranging function, something out of the ordinary needs to be going on that's allowing you to see contemporary reality kind of askew or cockeyed, and maybe that could be a kind of fairy tale kind of element of mythos. But the other thing that needs to be going on is a sort of surface kind of plausibility and seriousness that allows you to say, okay, this is a world that is recognizably sort of ours, and therefore the kind of new view that we're giving of it by the thing that's kind of, you know, askance or cockeyed is relatable to our everyday lives and is kind of something we can take action on. And when you bring kind of kids into that circumstance, it tends to throw me out of it a little bit. So in Alien, let me you know, descend from the clouds of abstract theory here and talk about the franchise specifically. In Alien, you have a very adult story with very adult protagonists, right? And they're these kind of space truckers, and their identity and their adulthood is absolutely tied to the set of questions that are being asked. In Aliens, you also have a very adult story, right? These are kind of space marines, and again, you know, their identity and their adulthood is kind of central. And yes, there's nude in Aliens, but her, and she's a child, but her role in the story is to kind of that shows a different side of Ripley, who has been in one sense kind of ripped from traditional gender roles, but in the second movie is kind of reestablished in a sort of nuclear family to show that, you know, women are not only capable of being leaders and soldiers and all the rest of it by kind of aping men, but they're also, you know, that's also totally consistent with a kind of dynamic of motherhood and care. In Alien Romulus, by contrast, you had a bunch of kids thrown on an adventure for no discernible reason, and that was a big problem with the film. Sorry, the kids were annoying. They did childish things, and it wasn't really working within any sort of set of ideas within the show. I worry a little bit about having kids telling this story. I mean, I don't. It sort of throws me out of it to have them behaving as children in circumstances that are really sort of grim and horrific. And it also leads me to ask us a set of like plausibility questions, like why are they the ones who go on the search and rescue mission?
Because they're enhanced. They're synthetic bodies
just created, and they're just like little kids. And it seems like just a whimsy thing that they kind of send off. To do this. Is there no one else who can do? And of course there are other teams that go, right? There's a more traditional kind of military team and so forth. I don't know. I don't know if I'm expressing this quite as sharply as I want to, but there's a certain disjuncture between the obvious seriousness of the situation and then having a bunch of kids kind of thrown into the middle of it.
Well, I don't agree.
Okay.
I think if one starts from the scenario that if one starts from the premise that this is an implausible and ludicrous scenario, then there's something quite powerful about experiencing it through the eyes of children who are far more likely, in my experience, to be able to see the absurdity or the strangeness in things than are adults. Part of the process of adulthood is having one's vision and one's senses occluded to the strange and to the fantastic. I think about, for example, the ways in which when my children were little babies, they experienced things like snowflakes or the wind or like dew on the grass, on little blades of grass. It's stuff that's odd and that's unusual. It is strange. There is something about a snowflake coming down that is fantastic, that is bizarre. But when one becomes so accustomed to those sorts of things and to those sorts of occurrences, the strangeness is lost. It just becomes, oh, that's just what happens. And it's only by, it seems to me, viewing these kinds of absurd situations through the eyes of someone who is sharp and smart, but not really experienced with those things, it actually becomes a quite powerful way of relaying to the reader just how bizarre and odd the entire set of circumstances is. That's the first thing I'll say from a storytelling perspective. From a viewing perspective, I will also say that one of my problems with this sort of sci-fi horror genre is just how unrelentingly dark and unrelentingly horrific, I suppose, the storytelling tends to be. That is not actually the way that life works, right? Even in the most horrific circumstances, there are these moments of light. And even in the most dramatic moments, there are these moments of absurdity and high comedy. And one of the things that I really liked about these first two episodes, particularly the scene in which Wendy is getting ready to gather the Lost Boys and go on the mission to save her brother, is that she grabs on one hand a very sharp bladed knife that she throws over her back. And on the other hand, she grabs her stuffed animal and she affixes the stuffed animal to her belt with exactly the same amount of care and seriousness that she's put the blade on her back. She is simultaneously, it seems to me, letting us know as viewers that this is, on one hand, a horrific voyage into the unknown and into the depths of, storytelling darkness. But on the other hand, it's supposed to be enjoyable and fun as well. And so, to me, and I am not the kind of sci-fi aficionado that you are, and so maybe this is part of the difference, but to me, the motif of childhood and the employment of the Peter Pan mythology is actually really effective in offering a slightly different beat to this storytelling than one would ordinarily see, I think, in the genre.
All right, we got to take a very quick break, but I want to pick that point up again in just a second. And we are back to continue our discussion of the first two episodes of Alien Earth. Jeff, we were talking about kids and their presence in science fiction. I mean, I get it. And I do like that it's not just, as in Alien Romulus, let's put some attractive young people on screen because that's a demographic we want to appeal to, which is what I think was going on in that movie. There's a mythological underpinning to why kids would be in this. They also explain it in the show by saying that adults can't really undergo the procedure because their brains are too rigid and probably attached, to the physical bodies, whereas kids' brains are more sort of plastic. I think one of the difficulties that it creates for me, and I think it probably is because I take science fiction seriously as probably the preeminent genre of social critique of contemporary times, is it does create absurdities that lead you to question how seriously the situation is being processed or presented to you. For example, the way that the kids interact with the aliens they do find verges on farce at times, right? There's the thing where they put the pod on top of the eyeball monster, and then the guy just kind of holds it down, and it's not really consistent how the eyeball monster behaves, because it doesn't really rattle around in there. It's not trying to get out. It just seems to have accepted I've got a pod on top of me. And at some points the guy's pressing down really hard, as I would too. I don't want the eyeball monster to get out and go in my damn eyeball. At other times he just sort of forgets about it and wanders off to the rest of the room. So I don't really get what's going on there, or what the traits of that monster are, or how the kids are really processing the danger from it. And then there's the thing right at the end of the second episode, the whatever it is, it's like this upside down flower bud or whatever, that they just leave one of the kids / adolescents looking at, and he just sort of stares at it, and then it has a big space tentacle come out, and he's just like, oh, and then he kind of walks off in the other direction.
So on that scene, I thought that we were cued for that as viewers from the previous scene, or maybe 2 scenes previous, in which we're told that the aliens respond to fear. And here we have a scenario in which this is the Toodles character who is not afraid.
Okay, so the alien's
He's not afraid
interested in it?
And in fact, if you go back and rewatch that scene, Toodles puts his face in to the alien tentacle's face. Like, he's not only is he not scared, like he seems very curious and interested in this. That's how I took that scene, right? That this was not responding to fear. And then the last thing that I would say is that I think it depends on your perspective. For you, maybe the introduction of the childlike characters into a sci-fi element introduces absurdity and takes you out of the register of seriousness. For me, I think it reveals the absurdity of the situation in the first place. Maybe that's not a conventional sci-fi trope, but it might be important that we're dealing with a showrunner here in Noah Hawley, who I don't think has made his bones in the sci-fi genre up to this point. So that might be part of what's going on as well.
Yeah, okay, that all seems reasonable. The last thing I want to say in this sort of general category of some of the boundaries that are often established and then broken through in Alien, it's a hallmark of the franchise, is the name of the spaceship, the Maginot. I don't know of any other Maginot than Maginot, the French kind of military planner who built the Maginot line of fortifications between the First and the Second World War, which sort of famously was static fortifications that it was believed would be unbreachable. You know, there's this impermeable barrier, this barrier that cannot be crossed, that then just a few years later were rather easily crossed by having tanks just kind of maneuver around the Maginot line. And so I think that's probably not, unless I'm missing a world famous Maginot, I think that's probably not an accident that they called the ship the Maginot in an
ironic sense.
Yeah, well, just to point up the kind of this shows all this franchise, these ideas. I don't want to call it a franchise because it just makes it purely about money. This set of ideas that are often engaged by Alien writ large often involves boundaries and their breaking, and to start introducing the idea of Maginot into that. Would seem to be not be an accident.
A famous breakdown of boundaries.
Yeah, would seem to be a nod that kind of I do understand what the ideas of this property are, and I'm going to continue along those lines.
But it does make me wonder if Weyland Yutani understands the irony of naming, and presumably they have named their own ship.
That's a good point. Yeah, I know I hadn't quite thought it through to that next level. Yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe we'll find out more about Yutani certainly going forward. It's another fear that has not been established, that has not come to light in this TV show so far that I had going in, was that they would start radically contradicting things we already know have happened in this universe. And again, it goes back to the point I was making about I do take science fiction quite seriously. I'm not like an absolute obsessive about continuity and every detail has to be right, but you do have to be working within some established rules of the world that you've set up. Otherwise, the kind of you're in the realm of fantasy or of something not serious that it's then harder to take seriously as a commentary on our present world. It was very smart that we've seen Weyland in the past. We'd never seen Yutani in the past. So that is a character you can introduce and have a sort of relatively blank slate. Whereas if they say this is Weyland and it's nothing like Peter Weyland from the other parts of the series, that would be a problem. So again, I thought that was kind of nicely done or well done, or at least disaster avoided. Last sort of group of things I wanted to talk about, Jeff, was this notion of kind of dreams and nightmares. It's always been a big part of a big idea in Aliens, whatever we're calling the whole property. The first movie sort of very famously begins with Ripley and crew waking up from hypersleep. It's shot like they're kind of emerging from this kind of soft protective womb into like the hard realities of the real world. That is almost perfectly replicated by the opening shots of Alien Earth. They do the same thing. And in the first movie, certainly one of the underlying mythos or mythologies was kind of Sleeping Beauty. Ripley is awaking from a sleep, and then at the end of the movie she goes back to sleep, and in between she has this quote unquote experience, and that always cued you up to think of what was going on the Nostromo as a dream / nightmare. And maybe there's a similar thing going on in this TV series that this is obviously a nightmare that's kind of happening on Earth. Maybe also there's a sleep waking up metaphor going on with the hybrids who do go to sleep. I mean, they die, the children. They give them a little flower and put them, euthanize them. And then they wake up in a very different kind of physical reality, wake up in a dream where they have sort of superpowers as well. Certainly Wendy is. Well, they're all enhanced. Right?
They're all enhanced.
Yeah. But it's also a nightmare in that there are aliens in this.
But even what we're given clear hints at is that the experience of being a synthetic is not a human experience.
Yes.
And there are both biological and presumably kind of storytelling reasons for this as well. Biologically, we're told that the synthetic bodies do not produce the kind of hormones that do things like produce emotions, right? Or that spark fear or desire. And so they're trying to figure out how to acculturate or to introduce the synthetics to the experiences that will, more or less generate those kinds of emotional experiences. But it's unclear how that's working or if it's working. We have, one of the Lost Boys says that she would like to take a bath. She misses taking baths, right? And so on one hand, the children are escaping, these literal fatal circumstances in their biological life, and they're gaining new capabilities, but they're also, we are cued to the idea that they are losing a lot of the experiences of what makes one human in the first place. The sensations, the emotions, the fact that one lives in a biological body that changes and alters and maybe breaks down. And so the dream nightmare scenario is in collision, right? In those ways.
They don't age, right? That's one of the major things that's going on. So they're sort of like vampires in that sense, right? Once created, they become ageless.
We know their bodies are ageless.
Yeah.
It's not clear how much they're going to mature, right? Emotionally. I guess it's going to depend upon how well the technology or the design of this kind of implantation of experiences goes. But it does seem to be a major problem that they can't replicate the kind of hormonal biological reactions that help to produce an emotional life.
Yeah. And the other thing I thought about the dream nightmare thing that was going on is this nightmare that's happening on Earth at this point in time is happening contemporaneously in this universe with the nightmare that's going on in the Nostromo. Alien Earth is supposed to be set 2 years before the events on the Nostromo, and they wake up and have their own nightmare, and there's one on Earth. And we I think know from the other things that happen kind of in the later movies, these nightmares don't intersect with each other, right? They remain kind of sealed experiences. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's telling, and I actually hope they continue this, that the crash site is sort of geographically contained within the physical, within the spaceship and the tower block that it's crashed into. And it sort of needs to stay there, I think, right? For this to all make sense, because we know from Aliens, when Ripley comes back to Earth, she never goes to Earth, but they don't say to her when she wakes up, oh, by the way, everyone on Earth is now infected with the eyeball monster. Yeah. We kind of have to assume that they get a handle on this.
Contained it somehow.
And that it becomes a contained nightmare from which these characters emerge and wake up, or from which certainly the species kind of emerges and wakes up, which, you know, it goes back to the point you were making about time and past, present, and future. The device of hypersleep and the ability to, you know, go on a 65-year mission, which the Maginot crew had gone on, but only actually live or only actually be awake for a small period of that time. Nostromo's been on a long mission and is kind of coming back. It allows you to think of these things as nightmares, that are collective nightmares that are had by different people. Mm-hmm. And just as my nightmare doesn't infect your nightmare, you know, these two nightmares can remain sort of sealed from one another.
But that they can come back and occur differently in different places.
Yeah, absolutely.
At different times.
Absolutely. So that's my hope, actually, as the series goes forward. I have a set of hopes. I mean, I hope that they're going to be able to kind of clarify what role the extraterrestrials are playing ideologically within the series, because it's very clear to me what role the gradations of artificial beings are playing. The aliens at the moment seem a bit like a backdrop or a bit peripheral, but I hope they can tie it in more coherently into a thematic whole. I also think it would be, very brave and probably very wise simultaneously to keep this story geographically contained. Even it would be a bravado act of kind of storytelling to keep it literally within the physical location it's in now. And that would be very interesting, right? You can go up and down that damn tower block quite a lot.
Right. And we've seen that there's a lot of diversity within that tower block as well, both in the ruined versus the non-ruined parts, but also just within the block itself, right? It's clear that we have the potential to encounter a lot of different ways of living, right, within this tower. And the Victorian Victorian party scene is one of those ways of living.
Yeah.
Presumably there are more.
So it's good. It's an interesting show. I've really enjoyed kind of exploring some of its ideas, at least as they appear to us on first viewing. We always love to hear what other people think about the show, and if they have different readings of the themes and ideas, we'd love to know that in the comments section. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how this story evolves.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes.
Okay, and on that bombshell,